my quest to build the craziest creations ever seen in Minecraft, I'm building enormous kingdoms all within one epic Minecraft universe. With unique building styles, interlocking lore, crazy creatures, and much, much more. After building the underground kingdom, we had plans for tons of other kingdoms existing in the same universe, each battling it out to prove themselves as the ultimate Minecraft kingdom. And what better way to continue our adventure than with the underground kingdom's arch nemesis, the underwater kingdom. This would be my most expansive kingdom yet, double the size of our last kingdom, packed with more mysteries to explore, from epic lore to hidden artifacts and even minigames. And over 2 years after starting this project, the Underwater Kingdom map is now available on my Patreon. But stay tuned to see how I transformed Minecraft's oceans into this massive immersive world, and show your support by subscribing to the channel so that one day we can combine these kingdoms into the most insane Minecraft map ever seen. As always, a mega project like this requires hours upon hours of research and planning. We brainstormed the major builds we'd be including, taking all of your feedback and comments into account. Steph worked hard on the story, giving this kingdom its history, and planning how the storylines would link across our fantasy universe. Anyway, with our plans ready, it was time to set them into motion. First things first, I started up World Painter and plotted out the seabed for our kingdom. Creating something on this scale is just not possible without using tools like this. I think, well, that it would explode my PC if I tried to make terrain of this scale in-game. But as you can see, we have tons of space to fill. And trust me, this place is gonna look insane when we're finished. I wanted to give this environment a prehistoric fantasy feel, so I painted the walls of the reef's drop-off with a layered rock pattern, inspired by ancient layered rock formations like Doonbriest in Ireland. I also created a custom setting for our coral reef, using the blob command to create some interesting rock formations. Over the last 2 years, I've learned and progressed so much as a builder, so some of the techniques I used earlier in the project definitely differ to what I do now, and you'll even see me going back and improving certain parts as I learn new techniques. But overall, despite using some outdated techniques at first, I definitely achieved the exaggerated fantasy oceanscape I'd envisioned. I also built some seagrass to scatter around the ocean floor, although I saved some of this for the end of the build. So with the basic terrain ready, we researched different coral types so that I could build with lots of variation to bring the seabed to life in the most authentic way possible. I built some table and brain coral, which you may recognize if you've played Subnautica, as well as staghorn, tube, and more. This place already looks more lively at this stage, but there is so much vast, empty space to fill with all the awesome things we have planned. Before we carry on with this epic ocean kingdom, I'd like to thank our sponsor, World of Tanks. World of Tanks is a tank battle game for PC with awesome attention to detail and historical accuracy that immerses you in the battlefield. And did I mention it's free? Over 100 million people have already hopped in their in-game tanks, and with more than 800 of them to choose from, it's hardly a surprise. You can choose tanks with different strengths from light to heavy, to destroyers to artillery, allowing you to choose a war machine to suit your playstyle. Take your chosen tank and roll out across tons of environments, from open fields to dusty deserts, or even take your battles to urban zones with over 40 arenas to play in. The game allows you to earn experience, modify your tank, and make the upgrades necessary to defeat your opponents on the battlefield. You can even create a clan and compete in tournaments to earn special rewards and prove you're the strongest tank out there. So what are you waiting for? Check out World of Tanks now using the link in the description to get started on your adventure, and use the promo code TANKMANIA when registering to get epic rewards to prepare you for battle. You'll get a free premium account for 7 days, 250,000 credits, the premium tank Excelsior, and 3 rental tanks for 10 battles each. Obviously, I built this massive plinth in the middle of the seabed for a reason, and it's for our epic underwater castle, home to the ruler of the merfolk that inhabit the ocean, who have some of the coolest lore of my Minecraft creations. As always, I started laying out a plan on the floor, and for this one, I wanted to make something really unique and organic, almost like the castle is a living creature. With everything plotted out, I started on the first tower, creating this really unusual shape, with prismarine details and a diagonal sea shelf roof to fit our nautical theme, which was quite the challenge to perfect. I added windows and smaller towers, setting them at different heights to keep things asymmetrical and natural looking. So with my design in motion, I steamed through this build for hours and whipped up the rest of the towers, adding thoughtful details to set them apart from one another. Almost every main tower is capped with a different shell-inspired roof, some even providing rooftop balconies, and there is just tons of height variation throughout the castle. I also lit up the windows with redstone lamps, which gives a nice stained glass window effect and helps to really bring the castle to life when it's submerged. And to finish up the castle, I of course had to add its power source, a conduit. Not only is this a great aesthetic and lore-related feature, but it also adds a cool game mechanic into this creative build, which we'll dive into later. Finally, I added these crazy winding archways inspired by the Little Mermaid castle, which just completely transformed this castle into one coherent piece. Before heading inside, I made some adjustments to the conduit shrine and edited the castle plinth's terrain, as the flat plane that it was sitting on just didn't feel natural. So with the exterior complete, I wanted to create an epic throne room in the main tower. For the grand entrance, I repurposed one of the massive sea shelf rooftops from the castle and adapted it to create the main entranceway. I then built out this sloping pathway and sandwiched it between these large quartz pillars, taking inspiration from ancient Greek and Roman architecture, an inspiration that persists throughout this entire kingdom. Minecraft's warped materials make a great addition to any ocean-themed build, so I used them to define the main entrance and created archways through the hallway. For the interior of the castle, there wasn't that much space to work with, but I decided to line the inside of the castle with some white concrete walls, connecting things up with a looping hallway. I then dug out the floor and lined the walls below with sea lanterns to help light the place up. Then, in the center, I built up a platform for Poseidon's grand throne. Now you may have guessed that this kingdom has a lot of lore and a ton of cool traditions and beliefs. The mer people residing here believe in a prophecy that Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, will return to rule them someday, leading them to victory over all the other kingdoms in the land, securing their position as the ultimate Minecraft kingdom. This throne room is dedicated to their long-awaited true king. But in the meantime, they determine their ruler through trial by combat in the kingdom's enormous battle stadium, the Sunken Arena. As you can see, whoever is victorious in the trial gets to enjoy this epic throne room containing a mural of Poseidon's legendary trident, which may just be hidden in a legendary ancient shrine elsewhere in the kingdom, as well as this underwater aquarium beneath the floor. Because hey, mer people like to keep pets too. So our epic castle is complete, and this makes the most insane centerpiece for our epic kingdom. Before I got to work on the upper district, I wanted to plot out some more of the pathways on the ocean floor so that I could really envisage what I was going to do with all of this space. Obviously, the mer people who lived here can swim freely, but the surrounding ocean is full of dangers and its floor is the safest, so most of the kingdom's inhabitants don't stray too far from the sandy pathways of the seabed. Next, I began plotting out the pathway for the kingdom's upper district. Not only is this super satisfying to watch, but it's the best way to begin planning a village, city, or any project you're working on that contains lots of buildings. I also made my life easier by marking out the placement of 4 main buildings I had in mind with red wool, continuing the pathway around these buildings, leading to further sections of the city. With the pathways planned, I started on the first of the main 4 buildings, the City Hall. This building resides directly in the center of the city, with the base foundations of the building made up of quartz pillars, connected together with archways. I added multiple domed rooftops, with lots of columns to match that ancient Greek inspiration, and even added some small seashells into the design to really emulate the aquatic theme throughout the build. I then finished off the roof by blending in different warped woods for a wavy, watery effect. Inside the City Hall, I went for a checkerboard marble floor and cleaned up the walls with some white concrete. To provide some support and lighting that matches the exterior, I built quartz pillars with warped accents, along with a chandelier in the center. Since this is our City Hall, I added a special table for our city councillors to sit during important meetings, along with a large clock on the wall. That way, the mer people know when their meeting's nearly finished, so they can rush off from their pews to have fun elsewhere in the kingdom. The second level of the city hall has been dedicated to this massive map table, showing just how large this ocean is. We're going to update this at the end of the project to see our progress. Anyway, I finished up the city hall by decorating the top floor with some warped materials, a little lighting and some shrubbery to bring things to life. Moving on to the second of the 4 main buildings, I thought the city would need some entertainment after their long council meetings. So I thought I'd build a small amphitheatre. In ancient Greece, amphitheatres were used for an assortment of events, such as gladiator combats, the circus, and the theatre. They consist of multi-tiered seating in a semicircle, and in this case, a feature stage in the centre. This is a pretty small amphitheatre, but perhaps we'll build something much bigger for epic battles somewhere else in the kingdom. Anyway, as you can see, I really tried to make sure every element of this project feels authentic to the environment. The sandstone really makes this feel as though it was sculpted from the sand of the ocean floor. And for the third feature building, I got to work on a highly requested grand library. Now when I think of a grand library, I picture something super elaborate and impressive. So I created this complex entrance, incorporating plenty of pillars into my design once again to match the style of the city. With the main entrance complete, I built a large cylinder for the main body of the library, detailing the walls and adding another layer to the roof, even incorporating another shell rooftop to match our ocean environment, and by some miracle, even diorite looks like a nice building material in this setting. To finish the exterior, I even toyed with the idea of using a glass roof, but ultimately opted for the same wavy roof effect that I used for the city hall. Now for the interior of the library, I wanted things to look as grand as the exterior, and what better way to do that than with an enormous book collection, stretching as far as the eye can see. I built a large staircase to provide access to the upper floor, along with support pillars that double up as lighting with embedded sea lanterns, and of course a nice chandelier to dangle from the centre of the ceiling. For the final main building, I wanted to build some kind of temple, a fictional place of worship where the mer people could gather. For this one, I decided to take inspiration from Minecraft's very own village temple, saving a grander temple/shrine design I had in mind for somewhere else in the kingdom. Even though this building is a little different from the rest, I think it's a really cool way of linking this crazy build to that classic vanilla Minecraft village that we all know so well. This building is packed with intricate detail, and I think the way the shell rooftops are integrated is super satisfying. Inside the temple, I neatened things up and added a long turquoise carpet for the main aisle. I then added some intricate archways, support beams and lighting, making sure not to draw too much attention away from the large stained glass window at the back. And of course, I added some pews for the merfolk to rest their tired tails on, along with a lectern and a small coffin behind. Given that I'd spent so much time sculpting and perfecting the castle's shell rooftops, I thought I should incorporate them further into the city. So I took some of the roof designs from the castle, changed the colours to match the city's theme, and dotted them around the main buildings to make houses for the mer people. For the first shell house, I walled off the shell's main opening and added a small stairway to an entrance on the right side, followed by a main entrance at the front with some small windows to bring it to life. Next, I worked on this Nautilus shell, so I started by adding pillars to support it, then placed a round, columned tower in the shell's opening to act as a sort of watchtower near the city's entrance, finishing up with a small window in the centre of the shell spiral. For the final shell house, I built some foundations, placing the shell on top and blending things together with a gradient of blocks. I then finished things up with a small protruding section with an even smaller shell roof and of course some windows. I reused the Nautilus shell watchtower at the back of the city, given that there would be an enormous threat looming behind the kingdom that the merfolk would have to keep their eyes on, creating a long sloping pathway towards an empty plinth behind the city. I have something really special planned for this plinth in a later chapter. Now that I built a great infrastructure, it was time to create smaller buildings to fill up the city. As you can see, I have a lot planned for this place. So with such a big task ahead of me, I focused on grinding out these buildings, making sure I differentiated each building in subtle ways, from decorative touches to window placements. When creating a populated area like this, it's always important to challenge yourself to build on an angle and at different heights so that things don't become too monotonous. You want things to feel connected, but you also don't want your city looking like a well-edit copy and paste fest. But seriously guys, I spent so much time individually designing each of these buildings, both repurposing early designs and coming up with new ones. There is thought behind every block that's been placed, and I really invested the time into making this place feel unique, maintaining the aquatic theme, whilst also drawing from some familiar inspirations from our own history. As you can see already, there are so many different types of buildings. You can only imagine all the different types of mer people who live here. To finish up the main city structures, I added a small ticket booth next to the amphitheatre, and then created a balcony on the other side, looking over a lower section of land, which may just become home to a large spectacle in a later chapter. Any guesses what I might have planned? Moving to the back of the city, next to the temple, I used the leftover space to create a burial ground. I designed an ornate fence to house the area, with a wide variety of gravestones, and even a small section that has been dug up to create a new grave, finishing up by placing some grass. Now it was time to decorate, so I started by revisiting the castle. Using the custom seaweed I placed around the kingdom earlier, I decorated the area around the castle to break things up a little. And because I made the castle on such a grand scale, I had to create some giant kelp to create a more dynamic seascape, as the custom seaweed wasn't quite enough. I sculpted a basic design and pasted our new custom kelp at varying heights amongst the seaweed, around the sides of the castle and along the main pathway. I then moved to the back of the castle to add some more giant kelp and seaweed, since there was quite a lot of space left around here. Finally, to wrap up this area of the project, I decorated the main city. Now I didn't actually build this underwater, as it would have just been too tricky. So instead, I'm releasing versions with and without water. This meant I had to really think about how I decorate this place, and I had to mess with a bunch of commands to add normal coral without filling the place with water before the project was finished. And as a placeholder for seagrass, I added grass tufts, which once again required some fiddling, since you can't place grass tufts onto sand. As you can tell, decorating the village with in-game items was really fiddly, but it was worth it to add a little extra life to the area. And with that, the upper district of the underwater kingdom is complete. Now, I mentioned in the last chapter that I had a large spectacle planned for where the upper district's balcony overlooks. So, it's time to create one of the underwater kingdom's most precious possessions, the sacred pearl clam. This giant pearl is actually a legendary relic, which binds an ancient spell protecting the kingdom from harm. The spell compels a certain menacing creature to do no harm to the underwater kingdom, but to instead protect it from attack from other kingdoms. I wonder what this creature is, and why the underwater kingdom needs such a huge bodyguard. Now that we have our precious pearl clam in position, I thought, what better way to decorate the area for the upper district onlookers and to disguise the importance of this relic than by adding some gardens. I decided to add some bubble geysers, since ordinary fountains would be completely useless underwater. And then I created an intricately patterned seaweed and coral garden, kind of like the gardens you see at big castles and mansions. I tried to incorporate some recognizable elements that you guys can imagine seeing in real life, while staying true to the underwater theme by using coral where possible. To finalize this area, I built staircases to link the gardens to existing pathways above, decorated with the custom seaweed we created previously, and tidied up the pearl clam's plinth. So that's our sacred pearl garden finished, and I think this area ended up looking really cool. It gives me Castle Gardens vibes, but with a fresh aquatic twist, packed with some epic lore. So, in front of the castle, I'd left a lot of space for some really special features, starting with some giant warrior statues. These particular warriors are from the Underwater Kingdom's military division that once roamed on land, but were captured by the seas and given a chance at redemption. The kingdom's many land-roaming enemies have varying skills and invaluable knowledge about the many enemy kingdoms in distant lands, making them a huge asset to the kingdom's defenses if captured and entranced by the mysterious Siren's song. These captured enemies soon became allies of the ocean and forgot about the lives they'd led before, able to breathe underwater like they once did the fresh air, riding the Seahorse cavalry to defend their new home. As a reminder to the kingdom's enemies of the power of the Siren song and the might of the kingdom's defenses, These statues were placed right before the castle's entrance. They have stood here proudly for centuries, so I of course had to finish up my design with a mossy algae effect, adding a subtle glow with some glow lichen. Since we now have these giant statues depicting our warriors on seahorses, I knew I had to add in a seahorse stables for the Underwater Kingdom's actual seahorse cavalry. So in the empty area behind one of the statues, I built a large stable to house the kingdom's team of seahorses. To differentiate the main upper city from the kingdom's more functional buildings, I used darker materials for the roof, including deep slate and stone brick. Now, I know that adding this fence may seem ridiculous since we're talking about seahorses here, but hear me out. As I mentioned before, the open water is extremely dangerous and the seahorses are bound to the seabed with enchantments, preventing them from coming to harm by swimming too high. So basically, the fence stops them from heading over to the Pearl Garden and chewing up the nicely kept plants. I added a few little seahorses to decorate, which are obviously very basic due to the scale, but I really think they're pretty cute and bring the area to life. To complete this area, I headed inside the stables to build some little pens and some basic decorations to finish things up, adding some lighting off camera. Next up, it was time to tackle the large area that I'd left blank on the right side of the castle entrance, the kingdom's main military base. To kick things off, I built the military barracks to house the kingdom's warriors and provide them with sleeping quarters. I pasted a few of these in a row, taking inspiration from real-life army barracks for the layout and design. Before getting stuck into creating more military buildings, I whipped up a large ballista, since the kingdom definitely needed some long-range weapons to defend itself. And of course, rather than using conventional ammunition like spears or stones, these mer people use magical tridents that surge through the water like high-speed missiles. With the ballista ready to duplicate and scatter around a little later, I repositioned the seahorse warrior statues so that they're a little bit more prominent on a higher plinth, before designing the walls and watchtowers to house the military area. Since the open water is very dangerous, this allows the ocean military to keep watch of all angles from the safety of the ocean floor. Next, I placed the walls and watchtowers, starting with an entrance branching off the main pathway to the castle. I continued the wall around the area, placing watchtowers at each corner and entrenching the structure into the rock below. And for our main military building, I wanted to create a sort of bastion building, loosely inspired by the Star Fort structure, acting as the main military base for planning and last resort protection. So with that in mind, I started working on my design, tweaking things a lot to strike the balance between a menacing fortress and a building that fits in with the rest of the Underwater Kingdom. After a ton of building, I added a bunch of crenellations and details before topping it off with a small domed roof and taller towers for keeping watch. I think it turned out super unique, but fit for purpose, although I did come back to this later in the project to refine the colour palette. Now, to quickly whip up an interior for this building, I placed down some pillars and created a large map table in the centre, ready for military planning and briefings, with space up top for plenty of troops to listen in. Back outside, I finally got to place those ballistas around the military base. I decided to place 2 at the main entrance in front of the seahorse statues, with 3 more around the right side of the base, including small walkways from the walls down to the ballista platforms. To finish up the military base, I thought I'd add an archery range, or perhaps a trident throwing range, along with some terraces with a bunch of supplies. Then, I added a small round building to act as a bell tower to alert the troops, with some space for a small medical wing below. Next up, I worked on a forge building where the kingdom's giant tridents are made, along with other weapons and armour. The mer people of course use bubble fuel, so the chimney is obviously for expelling excess bubbles from inside the building. Perhaps later we'll see the source of this bubble fuel. I whipped out the wool again as always for some planning, before making a start on some of the outbuildings. Now, I haven't added interiors to all of these, but I'd imagine they'd be used for a food hall, main medical centre, armour storage, weapon storage and combat training. Perhaps one day these will be functioning buildings in an epic TrixyBlox server or adventure map. Anyhow, months later I came back to this area to make some improvements to the colour palettes to finally finish this base up. And so, with the upper military area complete, it was time for one of the craziest defences the Underwater Kingdom has in its arsenal, the legendary Kraken. As I mentioned before, the sacred pearl we created earlier is actually the key to a powerful enchantment that keeps this big boy from destroying the entire kingdom. Can you imagine all of the mess he'd make? Anyway, this menacing kraken has protected the underwater kingdom for as long as the mer people can remember. In an epic battle between 3 divided kingdoms, the underground kingdom sent its most dangerous dragons to raid a galleon from the mysterious coastal kingdom. The galleon was on its way to attack the underwater kingdom in search for sunken treasures from its missing fleet. But the crew had not anticipated the sheer strength of what lurked below. The underwater kingdom's giant kraken tore down the galleon, and their magical trident crossbows opened fire on the mighty dragons soaring above. One of the dragons was defeated, sinking to the ocean floor, with the other 2 fleeing to new lands. I wonder where they could be. So, 2 kingdoms lost to the wrath of the ocean that day. But there were many more battles between the dozens of Minecraft kingdoms. Let me know in the comments what type of kingdom you hope we explore next. With the head finally complete in true Davy Jones style, I moved on to the tentacles, to really bring this monster to life. As you can see, I used world edit spheres to map out each tentacle, which honestly isn't the best method, and you can't really achieve a smooth tentacle effect without lots of manual tweaking. So this is something I revisited later to improve. Anyway, I continued mapping out each of the tentacles, sprawling out in different directions, and adding large ships into the Kraken's clutches to finish this epic battle scene. I then painted the Kraken with prismarine and copper blocks to add some texture to his skin, with some white concrete and calcite for the underside of the tentacles. Once again though, this was something I returned to, making tweaks later on. Last but not least, it's time to add the fabled shipwreck graveyard, where the Kraken's many victims now rest, where the inhabitants of Wreckage Reef get their building materials, and where the kingdom's giant sea serpent scavenges treasure for her collection. So with all of that in mind, I pasted in lots of ships, adding some variation and destroying them at different severities, to show that some of them took more of a beating from the Kraken, or have been scavenged and left sitting on the ocean floor longer than others. Anyway, with our shipwreck graveyard finalised, I revisited the Kraken because I was just not fully satisfied with how he turned out. I redid all of his tentacles using new techniques to make them look smoother and more organic. Plus, I repainted the whole Kraken with a new colour palette for a more fleshy, textured look. And I'm so happy with these improvements and glad I invested the time into improving my build. So, the Underwater Kingdom already has some pretty great defences, but there's actually a little more to the story. Beneath the Sacred Pearl Garden lie some enormous ruins of a long forgotten city, now a military outpost protecting an entrance to a giant cavern, leading to the legendary Underground Kingdom. This ancient base needed to be something really special, as it was once inhabited by some of the Mer people's earliest ancestors, so I had a ton of planning to do. With the main structures plotted out, I whipped up a watchtower design so that the merfolk could keep watch out towards the open water. They were largely unaware of the threats lying beyond the sea when this city was built, and it was established with only the dangers of the ocean in mind, staying close to the seabed as usual. Like any epic ancient city, I wanted this place to be absolutely packed with different buildings and details, so this took a lot of hard work. I wanted to keep my inspirations pretty similar to the Upper District, drawing from ancient Greece and Rome, but I was also influenced by Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings, which allowed me to come up with a really interesting building style to do this place justice. So, what happened here? Why was this place abandoned? Well, as you may have guessed, it has something to do with the Underground Kingdom. Unaware of the presence of kingdoms beyond the ocean, the merfolk focused on protecting themselves against the threats of the sea. They used ancient magic to enchant the giant pearl you see in the garden today to protect them from the fearsome Kraken, and for a while they thrived in the depths, until one day they were attacked from a nearby cave. The Underground Kingdom had released a deadly poison into the water, and in a chaotic attempt to flee with their sacred pearl, it was damaged and left behind. With the enchantment disrupted, the Kraken emerged from the distance to wreak havoc, and many areas of the city were damaged by its giant tentacles. However, it soon realised that the water was poisoned and also fled, leaving the city both abandoned and now damaged, with only a lonely dead coral tree left behind to indicate that there had ever been any life there. Once the poison released by the underground kingdom had dispersed, the merpeople returned from hiding to take the sacred pearl to safety and repair it. It became apparent that the old city was too near to outside threats, so they relocated and a grand vault door was built in hopes of locking out the underground kingdom. They engraved the door with the Kraken's tentacles, retelling the story of that fateful day in their architecture. The supplies of the old city were taken and the merpeople rebuilt, now inhabiting the upper district you see today. The old city was repurposed as an emergency military outpost, with a few warriors stationed there at all times to ensure the door to the underground kingdom remained sealed. Since then, many of the kingdoms in this universe became aware of one another, and the underwater kingdom realized that most of their threats now came from above. So they built the upper military base, armed with trident ballistas, to protect them from threats above, whilst this old city remains largely abandoned beyond being a military outpost and training ground. To this day, the lonely coral tree remains dead, and the old city is covered in algae, ruined and abandoned. But ironically, as the poison dispersed over the years, this place became overgrown with new coral and plant life. And that just about wraps up our kingdom's defenses. Honestly, they have an insanely good defense. They seem pretty unbeatable, but I guess we don't know how strong the rest of the kingdoms in this universe are yet. Moving on to the next area, I started by revamping the coral reef I made earlier in the project to get it ready for the kingdom's lower district, Wreckage Reef. This involved adding a lot of new rock formations and laying out some pathways bridging between them, which I built almost like tentacles to make this place feel even more mysterious and alive. With the new foundations of the reef set out, I painted everything with a custom block gradient, before moving on to dissecting a galleon I built from the Ultimate Survival World project so that I could create some really cool building designs for our Wreckage Reef, finding a use for all those resources that are brought down to the ocean floor by the mighty Kraken. If you were listening closely earlier, I mentioned that the lower district of the Underwater Kingdom is home to the captured souls of the kingdom's enemies, who are entranced by the Siren song and now serve the kingdom in the Seahorse cavalry. Despite technically being prisoners to the ocean, they've really made a cool little home for themselves in the reef. This large building is the hub of the reef, where the lost souls assemble to delegate maintenance of the reef and collect their rosters for their military duties at the main base. I absolutely love the little details on this ship, from the hanging lanterns to the anchor, and the decaying algae-covered sails look super eerie and ghostly, so I knew I was on the right track to making a home for the kingdom's lost souls. And with the centerpiece complete, I placed it down in the middle of the reef, neatening things up before getting started on designing a trading post. As you can see, by scavenging all they could from the shipwreck graveyard beneath the Kraken, the lost souls built their own community amongst the coral, becoming very self-sufficient, although they do live very simply and spend most of their time training, eager to please the Sirens, whose song keeps them compliant and passive. Those captured are forever cursed to walk the ocean floor, never to set foot on land again and only able to escape the seabed when carrying out their military patrols or battling the enemy in the Seahorse cavalry. So be careful if you spot them around the map. They will do their utmost to chase you away from their home. Anyhow, with the first trading post designed, I dotted a couple around the reef so that our lost souls can easily trade resources with one another. I then decided to create another market stall variant, perhaps for our lost souls to sell their food and source of bubble fuel, magma blocks, which are immensely valuable in this kingdom, as they're a limited resource and only obtainable from the most dangerous part of the ocean. Anyway, steering clear of too much danger for now, I placed these market stalls around the reef, adding some of them on the sides of the rocks to make this place feel really thrown together and irregular. I mean, it has been built on some crazy terrain with some scavenged shipwreck parts after all. For the lost souls' homes, I wanted to keep things simple and just use some old ship hulls for basic shelter, with some spare masts scattered around as extra materials for repairs or future buildings. And of course, being cursed to walk the ocean's floor has its drawbacks. Not being able to get a clear view of the open water is one of them. So to help them protect their home since they can't swim into the open water whilst off duty, I built this watchtower of jumbled up ship parts and placed it near the edge of the reef. I, of course, had to give this place a cool entrance. So I took 2 galleons and placed them either side of the pathway from the upper district, with a tired old sail hanging between them to mark the entrance to the ghostly Wreckage Reef district. Along with old ship parts, the Lost Souls also scavenge some valuable supplies and equipment. They have a few cannons, which they've adapted for protecting themselves using special pressurized bubble fuel, along with some cages for captured creatures and prisoners. And to enhance the ghostly vibe in this area, I took inspiration from an old lantern design of mine to come up with a new spooky green lantern to hang around the reef, made from old ship masts and smelted cannons. And this wouldn't be a coral reef without some life, so I grabbed some assets I'd created earlier in the project and whipped up a new glowing kelp design to go along with them. I then spent literally hours placing all this custom kelp, coral and shells around the entire reef, breaking up the grey rock foundations with pops of colour and bringing the place to life with so much variation and detail. It makes it pretty overwhelming to look at from afar, but hey, coral reefs tend to be super busy, both in Minecraft and in real life. Even though this place has a bit of a sad story, it's one of my favourite parts of the kingdom. Where in the kingdom would you guys choose to live? Another huge part of the merfolk's culture is combat. So I had to build the most epic battle arena possible, inspired by the great amphitheatres of ancient Rome and Greece. Since our small theatre in the kingdom's upper district was a little more Greek inspired, I wanted to go for a more classic Colosseum vibe for this one. So, I started by building a segment of our epic Sunken arena and tried rotating to make a cylindrical amphitheatre, but it just wasn't working exactly how I'd envisioned. So, I split things up into smaller portions to get the exterior laid out before adding all of the seating inside. I used some darker materials for the seating to make things look more populated, and it honestly looks as though this arena is full of spectators when you look from afar. I then painted each layer with a sandstone gradient to give it a sort of weathered effect, and tried to leave some of the detailing a little gnarly to show that the sandstone has eroded a little over the years. So the mer people attend many ceremonies in this huge arena, fighting hostile creatures and on rare occasions, fighting one another to earn higher ranks. Once a decade, a very special ceremony takes place, and the fiercest merfolk battle it out for the ultimate title of Ruler of the Seas. Although, the lost souls of Wreckage Reef are of course barred from entering, and they're sometimes even forced to take part as enemy mobs in the kingdom's other combat events, forever remaining under the control of the Siren song. Anyhow, to mark the grand occasion of determining their next ruler, the Sunken Arena is decorated with huge ribbons in the kingdom's colours, ready for the trials to take place, with the entire kingdom set to attend the occasion. And an epic underwater arena like this wouldn't be complete without some awesome surroundings. So I set it in place and got to work on expanding the coral reef around the arena to create an insane backdrop for the fiercest battles of the sea. I really wanted this area to be as immersive as possible, so it even includes an entire minigame that we developed and coded ourselves, all from scratch. You can take on the trials of the Sunken Arena yourself, alone or with friends, facing waves of ferocious underwater mobs with custom stats which are scaled to make things balanced for multiplayer, and there's even a special boss to defeat. How fast can you defeat the Sunken Arena waves? Will you work together with your friends, or sabotage them to defeat the most mobs yourself? Or will you hitch a ride out on the trusty escape dolphin? And that's our Sunken Arena complete. What an awesome place for a battle. So with a lot of time spent building in the underwater kingdom, I still had lots of space to work with and some really big plans to finish the project with a bang. With some key areas of the kingdom's lore still to cover, and my most ambitious Minecraft organics to sculpt. Since their triumph against the attack of the coastal and underground kingdoms, the merfolk wanted to build a striking reminder of their strength next to the fallen underground kingdom dragon remains, empowering those taking on the trials of the Sunken Arena, and reminding trespassers of the wrath of the sea. Believing that their increasing power was a sign that Poseidon would soon be making his return, the merfolk built an enormous statue of their true ruler emerging from the depths of the ocean wielding his trident, towering over the slain enemy dragon beneath him. And when I say our merfolk built a giant statue of Poseidon, what I really mean is I spent days working non-stop to sculpt the biggest organic I have ever built in Minecraft. Somehow, I'd managed to get the head sculpted really quickly, so I got to work roughly blocking out the body. My guy was looking pretty top heavy and Dorito shaped, so I made adjustments to the shoulders to improve the proportions and made some major changes to the body shape. I also encased the base of the statue in rock, as though he'd erupted from the depths to protect his kingdom. And after that, I honestly just spent a lot of time tweaking, and that's a lot of what sculpting is. Sure, I could have just imported a model or got help from other builders, but I'm a builder, not a build team. And challenging myself to build these creations alone is part of why I'm so proud of my builds and why I think they're special. To combine just a builder, a story writer and a developer pouring all our effort into Minecraft creations, and to be able to share these insane worlds with you guys as a result is something we love doing, and we feel very lucky that we get to do it. Anyway, at this point, I was wishing this only took as long as this time lapse. But with the body and hands finally finished, I began plotting out the hair. I wanted it to look super dynamic, as though it was being swept with the currents of the sea. Right now, it kind of looks crazy because of all the bright colours, but this helped me to keep track of the shapes and to paint and texture each strand separately later. I then whipped up Poseidon's giant trident and did some fiddling to get it rotated on the right axis. And then, it was finally time to paint. I started by adding some moss/algae over the areas that would be exposed to the most light from above. Next, I painted the whole sculpt much like you would a painting, to accentuate the shapes I'd made, using lighter blocks for the highlights and darker blocks for depth, which looks pretty extreme at first. But just like smudging out shading on a pencil drawing, I blended it all out to make it look a little more natural. And after a lot of hard work, this gigantic statue was complete, but I wasn't quite finished with this epic scene just yet. Next to our mighty Poseidon statue, I still had to build those dragon remains of the fallen dragon from the underground kingdom. So I plotted out a massive carcass, curving around the base of the statue, buried in the sandy seabed. I then made lots of manual tweaks to set the skeleton in the best position alongside the statue, before making the final adjustments to the shoulder blades, and getting started on yet another sculpt for this build, the dragon skull. At this point, I'd been sculpting organics non-stop for days on end, but I pushed through to build this head from scratch, refining the shape and adding these menacing horns around the crown of the head and the lower jaw. And of course, just like the Poseidon statue, I had to add some texture to this epic sculpt, so I carefully painted the whole skeleton, adding some moss/algae over the top to match the statue. As you can see, I went through a ton of iterations for this sculpt, and it's quite different from working in digital sculpting software. But it's really satisfying to see the journey to the final result laid out like this, and I'm honestly so proud of how this scene turned out. And, as promised, it was time to make an epic shrine to house the legendary trident of the mighty Poseidon. Poseidon was said to have gained the favour of the Sirens, who protects his trident until he returns to rule the seas, cursing those who attempt to wield it with their entrancing song. Since this shrine was built around the same time as the old city, Steph and I decided to use the same gateway from there and make some adaptations to the design, opening up the large door to make a cave entrance, fixing the damage that the Kraken had caused by the old city, and switching out the design above the door for a trident emblem. I finished the place up with plenty of kelp, seaweed, coral and shells to decorate, before heading inside to place the sirens surrounding the plinth of Poseidon's trident. I then got to painting the interior, which at first looks like some wacky graffiti from a skate park or something. I was playing around with a bunch of patterns, as I wanted this area to feel super magical and mystical, as though the power of the trident is seeping out into the shrine and shrouding the walls with an intricate watery glow. The shrine extends all the way up through the terrain, breaching the surface with an ornate glass dome, with a wavy stained glass window pattern to match the walls of the interior. To heighten the mystical feeling of this cave, and to play on the idea of reflections since we're underwater, I decided to flip the build to create a reflection, to give this trippy illusion, and to make you guys feel like you're in some kind of mirror dimension when you discover this place. And honestly, it's so cool to explore in game. It's really like an optical illusion. And on top of that, we of course had to add something extra special for you guys. Poseidon's trident itself. But this isn't just any trident. You see, this great weapon is said to belong to Poseidon, whom the merfolk tell many of their own tales about. From slaying the Leviathan to earning the favour of the infamous Sirens, the stories were endless. But Poseidon was elusive. He had never been seen by the merfolk, and they believed he had been captured and forced into servitude by Zeus, the sky god, who ruled over a vast kingdom high up in the clouds. They believed that one day Poseidon would return and wield his mighty trident, staking his claim on the underwater kingdom's throne, finally conquering their opponents and becoming the ultimate Minecraft kingdom. In the meantime, the trident remains in its shrine, surrounded by the statues of the Sirens, and if an unworthy soul were to take it, they would be cursed, hearing the Siren song and experiencing their wrath. And we literally learned how to make music and wrote our own Siren melody to put into the map, which you can also check out in the description, also adding tons of special features to the trident's functionality. If you wield it for too long, the Sirens will send some nasty surprises after you until you recharge it at one of the trident charging points dotted around the map. On top of that, we added an entire minigame just so you can have the most fun possible with the trident. Riptide Rings takes you on an epic journey around the entire map on a challenging course through all the epic builds created through the project. Reckon you can beat my time? These features honestly make this place so fun, no matter how you choose to play in this world. So, what was left to do? Well, with a few large areas left, I still had tons of building to do to get this epic kingdom finished. This area behind the Grand Castle was set aside for one of the coolest areas yet. I've reserved this final area for some huge underwater volcanoes erupting through the seabed. As mentioned earlier, the merfolk use bubble fuel throughout the kingdom, but where do they get it? Well, from here. The magma blocks located in this super satisfying gradient of these underwater volcanoes provide the kingdom with a limited power supply, and obtaining it is extremely dangerous. Not just because of the boiling lava. No, this place is home to something far more terrifying. An enormous sea creature said to have descended from the great Leviathan defeated by Poseidon, the sea serpent. We'll hear more about her story shortly, but can we just appreciate how satisfying this huge shape is? It took a long time to plot out such a complex and dynamic pose for this serpent, but it was so worth the hard work. And so with her huge, slinky body mapped out, I moved on to our sea serpent's head, sculpting a fierce, open-mouthed pose, which would definitely be enough to warn anyone off. But what is she protecting? Of course our serpent would not be complete without a forked tongue and some huge fangs, so I added those in along with some more details in the mouth. Also, you may have noticed that I'd built the head slightly on the small size for the body. This is because I wanted to add some huge fans around the head, almost like a realistic version of Gyarados. And to take things even further, I decided to add an enormous fin running all the way down the serpent's spine. So I plotted out large spikes all the way down the spine, which was super fiddly due to the crazy shape and length of this thing. I then curved the spikes and joined them all the way down to create one long piece. And that process led me to the tail, which was looking a little less impressive compared to the rest of this insane sculpt. So I decided to make this creature feel even more aquatic and add a large tail fin curving around in a dynamic pose in the water. To add yet more detail to this magnificent beast, I added some long, sharp tendrils to the head, before moving on to the crazy task of painting. I wanted to do something scaly for the main skin texture, and I didn't want to overcomplicate the underbelly since it already had that rib texture all the way down. I played with the idea of using stained glass for the fin detail, but it just got lost in the body. So after lots of experimenting, Steph and I eventually decided on a colour palette, painting a gradient all the way down the body, tail, back fin and head fins to add further depth, which required tons of fixing due to the overlapping sections. I then placed the sea serpent down, spilling over her huge plinth. But the real question is, how did she grow so big? Why did she nest on this plinth? Well, with the large shipwreck graveyard nearby, you may have been wondering what happens to all the sunken treasure that goes down with these ships. We know what happens to the crew. They end up in Wreckage Reef, hypnotised by the Siren's song, and most of the materials and cargo are taken with them too. But what about the precious cargo? Well, behind the Grand Castle, there was once a gigantic treasure chest containing all the treasures of the kingdom. Over the years, the area became dangerous with the eruption of the surrounding volcanoes, and the greedy sea serpent took advantage of the desertion, claiming the treasure for herself and feeding off of it. In fact, the kingdom is forced to give up almost all of its treasure to her, and in return, she refrains from laying waste to the kingdom. But the serpent is cunning, and her greed fuels her. She continues to grow and has reached a ridiculous size, becoming an imminent threat to the entire kingdom. Their only hope is that Poseidon returns to defeat the Leviathan bloodline once and for all. Come to think of it, a lot is riding on his return. And because of her control over the kingdom's treasures, their ability to trade and forge peaceful relations with other kingdoms has been significantly hampered, leaving the merfolk more isolated and feared than most. So, some of the serpent's treasure was retrieved by the sea serpent from the Kraken's fallen victims in the shipwreck graveyard, and some was taken from other kingdoms in raids and battles. But the sea serpent also maintains her supply with her very own army of serpent children who stole some of her most valuable treasure from the vaults of the underground kingdom. Behind her treasure plinth lies their hatching hollow, full of mystical glowing serpent eggs, with some fresh hatchlings roaming around in search of nearby creatures to torment and treasures to bring to their mother. With our sea serpent scene complete, it was time to add the finishing touches to the build. So I made some new, larger seagrass to scatter around the ocean floor, and also added some more kelp and shells too, before getting to work on yet more organics to inhabit the open water. Steph and I started sculpting epic creatures to dot around the kingdom, starting with a pair of large manta rays. These were super fun to create and were just the perfect addition to the aquatic life in the kingdom, as we were definitely lacking in friendly looking creatures. I then moved on to sculpting some jellyfish, mostly using stained glass with light in the centre to make them look bioluminescent and magical. And finally I moved on to some smaller creatures, and perhaps an obvious choice, some fish. I built several different types of fish to dot around in little pairs and schools, so that this ocean is busy and just full of life when you explore it for yourselves. Placing the finishing touches in a project that took such an outpouring of passion and effort felt kind of surreal, and I'm honestly so satisfied with how all this hard work turned out. This place was looking unfinished and empty for a while, but the building in this final chapter just elevated things to a whole new level. So let's flood this place with water and take a look at everything we've built on this epic journey in the creation of the underwater kingdom. Taking a look at our updated map table, which is made up of over hundreds of maps by the way, which we had to manually update, I am just amazed at how far our journey took us since we first made this table in chapter 2. This has been an insane adventure, and I'm so glad I've been able to share it with you guys. and I just can't wait for us to go on many more adventures together. Be sure to check out the map on my Patreon. You don't have to pay monthly if you don't want to. You guys can keep the map and end your membership if you only want to pay once. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you can keep up with all of my future creations. Finally, I'd like to say an absolutely huge thank you to my Netherite Patreons for the support. You guys are just awesome. And this kind of support is why we can continue making this kind of content for you. Thank you guys for watching, enjoy the map, and I'll see you in the next one.